You pass someone at work, you nod, they nod back. You use their name, they pause longer than they had to. That pause is what I mean. My name is Desmond Ray. I work with hiring processes and career development. The candidates who advanced were not always the loudest. They were the ones who made small, steady moves that shifted how decision makers saw them. A career is not built by grand gestures. It is built by behaviors so quiet you could miss them. The person who answers an email clearly, who follows up without being asked, who acknowledges a mistake before confronting. These moves ripple forward. By the time a hiring panel sits down to talk about you, those small actions have already done the work. This is not a list. This is one mechanism explained, how small, repeated behaviors compound into the kind of credibility that moves careers forward. The mechanism works because decision makers do not see individual actions. They see patterns. And patterns built from daily consistency carry more weight than any single impressive moment. Savings account with 3 to 6 months of expenses changes how you show up. Not because anyone else knows it is there, because you do. When a manager calls you in unexpectedly, your mind does not jump to whether you can cover rent if the news is bad. You listen, you process, you respond with clarity instead of panic. That difference shows the candidate with financial resilience carries themselves differently. They do not take the first offer out of desperation. They ask thoughtful questions. They negotiate because they can afford to walk away if the fit is wrong. The ones living paycheck to paycheck often push too hard or accept terms that leave them resentful 6 months later. Both want the job. Only one has the stability to approach it as a choice rather than a lifeline. Setting up automatic payments from your paycheck to an emergency fund, targeting 3 to 6 months of expenses, is not exciting, but it builds financial resilience, and that resilience removes a layer of workplace anxiety most people carry without realizing it. When you are not worried about an unexpected car repair, you have more mental capacity to focus on the work. You can think about the project deadline instead of the credit card balance. Automating transfers removes the decision friction from saving behavior, ensuring consistent contributions before discretionary spending occurs. Good credit history works the same way. Building a good credit history helps you access credit at favorable rates and terms, which improves financial resilience. Good credit scores signal creditworthiness to lenders, resulting in lower interest rates and better loan terms that reduce long-term financial burden. When an opportunity requires relocation or additional training, the person with good credit can take it. The person without it hesitates, and the opportunity goes to someone else. Hiring managers do not see the credit report, but they see the pattern of who says yes to growth opportunities and who does not. Debt reduction frees up more than money. It frees up mental space. Debt reduction improves financial resilience by freeing up capacity to save and invest, and reduces workplace stress that affects productivity. Debt creates financial stress that spills over into workplace performance, while reducing debt frees up mental bandwidth and cash flow for wealth-building activities. When you are not spending hours each month figuring out which bill to pay first, you have those hours back. You can focus on career tasks that move you forward. You can prepare for a presentation instead of managing late fees. The productivity difference is real, and it shows up in your output. No one at work knows whether you have an emergency fund or whether your credit score is strong. But they see the result. They see the employee who does not flinch when the company restructures. They see the person who can afford to wait for the right move. Financial foundations are not flashy, but they are the bedrock of a career that can weather change without breaking. That financial resilience works like a ratchet, each behavior tightening your position so the next behavior has more leverage. The emergency fund creates breathing room. That breathing room lets you build credit without panic borrowing. Better credit gives you access to favorable terms when you need capital for a career move. Lower interest costs free up cash flow. That cash flow accelerates debt reduction. Debt reduction opens mental bandwidth. That bandwidth allows better focus at work. Better focus drives better performance. Better performance creates opportunities, and those opportunities compound because the financial foundation underneath them is solid enough to let you choose the right one instead of the urgent one. You watch a newly promoted manager walk into their first team meeting. They do not have all the answers. They say so out loud. The room leans in. Managers who build the most influence are not the ones who project certainty they do not feel. They are the ones who acknowledge when they are still learning, then follow through on small, repeatable behaviors that create trust. They send clear meeting notes. They check in with team members individually. They admit when a decision needs more input. Those habits, repeated week after week, build more credibility than any performance of confidence ever could. Newly promoted managers build more influence through 3 simple habits that create trust and clarity, rather than by having all the answers. Consistent small behaviors signal competence and reliability over time, building credibility more effectively than projecting false confidence. There is a myth that newly promoted managers need to project confidence and have all the answers to build influence. That advice sounds reasonable until you try to live by it. Pretending to feel confident when you are uncertain creates distance and erodes trust. Your team senses the gap between what you are saying and what you actually know. That gap erodes trust faster than admitting you do not have the answer yet, but you will find it. Managers gain influence through trust and clear communication, not through having all the answers. Trust comes from doing what you said you would do. Clear communication means your team knows what to expect from you. 3 simple habits build more influence than projecting false confidence. Acknowledging what you are still learning, following through on commitments, and keeping your team informed. Those small leadership behaviors, repeated over time, create rapport and respect. Managers stumble when they try to act like they have mastered the role before they understand it. They make decisions too quickly to avoid looking indecisive. They dismiss questions to protect the image of authority. Their teams stop bringing problems to them because the cost of asking feels higher than the value of the answer. Influence drains away, not because the manager lacks skill, but because they are spending energy on the wrong performance. The managers who succeed do the opposite. They say, "I do not know yet, but I will find out by Thursday." They say, "That is a good question. Let me check and get back to you." They say, "I made a mistake on that timeline. Here is the corrected version." Each of those admissions feels risky in the moment, but the follow-through that comes after each one builds trust. The team learns they can rely on the manager to tell the truth and to deliver on what they promised. When you acknowledge what you are still figuring out, your team stops waiting for you to pretend otherwise. They can ask real questions. They can bring you problems that need solving instead of problems they think you want to hear about. That shift changes the quality of information you receive, which changes the quality of decisions you can make. These are not grand leadership moments. They are small, repeated actions that build over time. A clear email, a kept commitment, a question answered honestly, a follow-up that arrives when promised. None of them make a story worth telling at a conference. But together, they create the kind of influence that lasts because it is built on trust rather than image. That pattern of acknowledgement and follow-through creates a feedback loop that strengthens with each cycle. The first time you admit you do not know something, it feels vulnerable. But when you come back with the answer you promised, your team notices. The second time, the admission feels slightly easier because you have evidence it does not cost you credibility. The third time, it becomes part of how your team expects you to operate. By the 10th time, your willingness to say, "I do not know," has become one of the reasons they trust you. Each honest acknowledgement, paired with reliable follow-through, reinforces the pattern. The team brings you harder problems because they trust you to handle them honestly. You get better information because people are not filtering what they tell you to protect your ego. That better information leads to better decisions. Better decisions build your track record, and that track record, built cycle by cycle, becomes the foundation of lasting influence. The mechanism compounds because each small behavior strengthens the conditions that make the next behavior more effective. You take a new job in a different city. Your partner takes a role in another state. 6 months later, you move again, then again. Each transition pulls at routines, at stability, at the small predictable things that make a household work. Couples who manage this well do not do it alone. Couples managing constant career transitions strengthen their marriage by working together on every transition and looking for solutions that meet both partners' needs. Collaborative problem-solving during transitions strengthens communication lines and builds mutual trust and respect, which allows love to thrive despite constant change. A candidate would relocate for a role, and 6 months later, they would apply somewhere else because the move had strained their marriage to the breaking point. The ones who stayed, who built stable careers across multiple transitions, were the ones whose partners treated the moves as a shared problem. Working together on transitions strengthens the partnership and reduces the strain each move creates. When both people sit down and look at what the next step means for finances, for time together, for daily routines, the transition stops feeling like one person dragging the other along. It becomes a plan both people shaped. That shared ownership matters. Couples who navigated 25 moves in 50 years did not do it by one person making all the career decisions and the other person following. They looked for solutions that met both partners' needs. That did not mean every move was perfect for both people. It meant they asked the question every time, what does this cost you? And what can we do to balance it? Sometimes the answer was a shorter commute for the partner who was not changing jobs. Sometimes it was a commitment to stay in the next location longer. Sometimes it was choosing a place that gave one person access to their professional network, even if it was not the most convenient city for the other. Shared planning quiets the uncertainty that comes with career transitions. When you do not know what the next year will look like, sitting down together and mapping out what you do know helps. You know when the lease ends. You know what the new salary will be. You know which expenses will change. Writing it down together turns the abstract worry into a set of decisions you can act on. That process does not eliminate the stress of moving, but it keeps the stress from turning into resentment. Candidates walk into interviews with that kind of stability behind them. They talk about the relocation in clear terms. They have thought through the logistics. The ones who have not worked through it with their partner stumble over questions about why they are leaving their current role or what has drawn them to this city. The uncertainty in their answers raises doubts. The relational side of career moves does not show up on a resume, but it shapes whether the move succeeds. A transition that strengthens the partnership creates a foundation for the next step. A transition that fractures, it costs focus, it costs stability. And over time, it costs the kind of career progress that depends on being able to commit fully to the work in front of you. Not every couple faces repeated moves, but every couple faces career decisions that affect both people. The principle holds whether you are moving across the country or deciding whether to take a role that requires longer hours. Work together on the decision. Look for the solution that meets both people's needs. Plan it out so the uncertainty does not sit unresolved between you. Those habits build a partnership that can carry the weight of a long career. That shared approach to transitions creates a compounding advantage that extends beyond any single move. The first time you sit down together to map out a relocation, you establish a process. The second time, that process is already in place. You know what questions to ask each other. You know which logistics to tackle first. By the 5th or 10th transition, the planning itself has become efficient. You can assess a potential move faster because you have built a shared framework for evaluating what matters to both of you. Each transition you navigate together strengthens the communication patterns that make the next one smoother. The trust you build by honoring each other's needs in one move carries forward into the next. And that accumulated trust becomes the foundation that allows both careers to progress without one person sacrificing their trajectory for the other. The couple that masters this does not just survive repeated moves. They use each move as an opportunity to refine how they make decisions together. That skill, practiced over years, becomes one of the most durable career assets either partner can build because it means neither of them has to choose between their work and their marriage. The mechanism compounds because the partnership itself grows stronger with each test it passes. There is work that happens before you walk into an interview room. Resume habits and follow-up emails are silently judged. The person reviewing your file is not reading for content alone. They are reading for patterns. Does this person check their work before they send it? Do they follow instructions? Can they write a clear sentence without burying the point? Those questions get answered in the first 30 seconds. The resumes that move forward are not always from the most experienced candidates. They are from the candidates who show they understand that a resume is a document someone else has to read. That means clean formatting, no spelling errors. The most important information appears where the reviewer expects to find it. Follow-up emails carry the same weight. After an interview, most candidates send a thank you note. Some send it within 24 hours. Some send it 3 days later. Some never send it. The candidate who sends a note the next morning, who references a specific moment from the conversation, who keeps the message to 3 sentences instead of 6 paragraphs, stands out. Not because the email changes the assessment of their skills, but because it shows they understand professional timing and clarity. Small interview answers can raise doubt or approval in ways the candidate does not expect. A question about how someone handled a project that went off schedule gets answered in one of 2 ways. One candidate gives a 2-minute answer that blames the project manager, the unclear requirements, and the client who kept changing their mind. Everything they say might be true, but what gets heard is someone who will not take responsibility when things go wrong. Another candidate answers the same question by saying they underestimated the timeline and had to renegotiate the deadline with their manager. They explain what they learned and how they adjusted their approach on the next project. That answer takes 90 seconds. it moves their file forward. The difference is not in the project outcome, it is in how the candidate frames what went wrong. One blames the system, the other acknowledges their part and shows what changed because of it. Hiring managers are listening for ownership. You do not have to have a perfect record. You have to be able to talk about your record honestly. Understanding these quiet cues helps position you for progression because they are the cues that decision makers use when they sit down to compare candidates. Two people with similar experience. One has a resume that reads cleanly. The other has a resume that forces the reviewer to hunt for information. One sends a follow-up email the next day. The other sends nothing. One answers interview questions with clarity and ownership. The other answers with blame and vague explanations. When the panel meets to make the hire, those differences are not written down anywhere, but they shape the conversation. Most candidates spend their energy on the visible work. They polish their LinkedIn profile. They rehearse answers to common interview questions. That work matters. But the invisible work, the work that happens in how you format a document or time an email or frame an answer about failure, is what separates the candidate who moves forward from the candidate who stays where they are. These are not tricks, they are habits. They are the behaviors that signal you understand how the process works from the other side of the desk. Those small signals accumulate into a coherent impression that forms before the interviewer consciously registers what they are seeing. A resume with consistent formatting suggests attention to detail. A follow-up email sent promptly suggests respect for the interviewer's time. An answer that takes ownership suggests maturity. No single signal determines the outcome, but together they create a pattern. That pattern answers a question the interviewer is asking underneath all the technical questions. Can I trust this person to represent my team well when I am not in the room? The candidate who understands this knows that every interaction, from the moment their resume arrives to the moment they walk out of the building, is answering that question. The ones who succeed are not performing trust. They are demonstrating it through behaviors so consistent, the interviewer stops questioning whether it is real. Each small choice, each moment of clarity, each piece of evidence that they check their work and communicate cleanly compounds into a judgment that feels intuitive but is actually built from dozens of micro-observations. The mechanism works because the interviewer's brain is pattern matching faster than they can articulate what they are seeing. By the time they sit down to make the hire, the decision often feels obvious. And the candidate who moved forward may never know which specific moment tipped the balance because it was not one moment. It was the accumulation of moments where they showed they could be trusted. You make one good decision today. Tomorrow, you make the same decision again. The day after that, you do it once more. A month later, no single day stands out, but the pattern does. That pattern is what builds reputational capital. Promotion decisions come down to two names with similar experience on paper. Both have delivered their projects, but one has delivered consistently, month after month, without drama or missed deadlines. The other has delivered in bursts, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes late, always with an explanation for why this time was different. The panel picks the first candidate every time, not because the second one lacks talent, but because consistency is easier to trust. Repeated daily actions compound into reputational capital faster than most people expect. You answer emails clearly and on time. You show up to meetings prepared. You follow through on what you said you would do. None of these actions is remarkable on its own. But when you do them every week for a year, the people around you stop wondering whether you will deliver. They assume it. That assumption becomes your reputation, and your reputation precedes you into every conversation about your next step. Flashy efforts draw attention, but they often miss the nuance that matters to decision makers. Candidates walk into interviews after a single high-profile project success. They lead with that success. Then the question comes about day-to-day work habits. How do they prioritize when two deadlines conflict? How do they handle feedback that challenges their approach? How do they keep a project on track when the initial excitement fades? The answers to those questions tell more than the big win ever could. Decision makers care about what happens between the visible successes. They care whether you can maintain quality when the work is routine. They care whether you will still show up with focus on a Tuesday in February when the project has been running for 6 months and there is no applause left. The person who can do that work, week after week, without needing external validation to stay motivated, is the person who gets the next opportunity. Building credibility takes time and steady effort. You plant seeds, you water them, you pull the weeds before they spread. You do this work, even when nothing looks different from one day to the next. And then one season, you look up and realize what you have built has grown into something substantial. People try to rush this process. They take on every visible project. They volunteer for every high-profile committee. They make sure their name is on every email that goes to senior leadership. The effort exhausts them, and it does not build the kind of credibility that lasts, because credibility is about being trusted, and trust comes from repeated, reliable behavior. The long game rewards the person who can do good work today and then wake up tomorrow and do good work again. It rewards consistency over flash, because consistency is what holds when conditions change. The economy shifts, the company restructures, the manager who hired you leaves. The flashy project gets canceled. What remains is your reputation for delivering, and that reputation is built one day at a time through work that no one applauds, but everyone notices. That daily consistency creates an information advantage that most people miss. When you show up reliably, week after week, you become part of the baseline. Managers stop tracking whether you will finish your work because your track record answers that question. That baseline position means you are no longer spending energy proving yourself. You can spend that energy on work that compounds. The employee who is still proving they can meet deadlines is operating in a different economy than the employee whose reliability is assumed. The second employee gets offered stretch assignments because managers trust them to figure it out. They get included in strategic conversations because their judgment has been tested repeatedly and held. They get first consideration when a new role opens because they have demonstrated they can sustain performance over time. None of that access comes from a single impressive quarter. It comes from the accumulated evidence of years where they did what they said they would do. Each quarter adds weight to that evidence. Each completed project adds another data point. And at some threshold, the weight of that evidence shifts how decision makers see you. You move from someone who might be ready to someone who has already proven it. That shift is invisible while it is happening, but once it completes, it changes what opportunities flow toward you without you having to reach for them. You sit at your desk, someone stops by to ask a quick question. You answer it, they thank you, and walk away. 10 minutes later, someone else appears with another question, then another. By noon, you have helped 5 people and finished none of your own work. This happens because you have not set a boundary, and the absence of a boundary looks like an invitation. The employee who cannot protect their time becomes the person everyone leans on for small favors, and the small favors accumulate until there is no space left for the work that actually moves their career forward. The people who advance are the ones who say yes to the right things and quietly shield the rest of their time. Setting boundaries silently is a skill most employees never learn because they confuse boundaries with rudeness. A boundary is saying, I can help you with that at 2 o'clock, and then returning to your work. The person asking does not feel dismissed. They feel acknowledged, and you have protected the hour you needed to finish the task that was already on your plate. Prioritizing work thoughtfully raises output without appearing off task. Performance reviews praise employees for being responsive, but those same employees have missed deadlines on their core responsibilities. Responsiveness feels like productivity, but it is not the same thing. Productivity is finishing the work that matters. The employee who prioritizes knows the difference. They answer emails at set times instead of leaving the inbox open in the background. They block focus time on their calendar and treat that time as seriously as they would treat a meeting with their manager. Managing energy reserves is as important as managing time. Work submitted late in the afternoon has noticeably lower quality than work submitted in the morning, not because the employee cares less, but because they have spent their clearest thinking on tasks that do not require it. The person who succeeds long-term learns to save their best focus for the career-critical moments. They do not start their day by clearing 50 low-priority emails. They start with the task that requires the most thought, work on it while their mind is fresh, and then move to the smaller tasks after. Energy is finite. Mental clarity does not last all day. The employee who understands this protects the hours when their thinking is sharpest and uses them on the work that will be judged when promotion decisions are made. You do not announce that you are protecting your time. You just stop making it available for interruption. You do not explain that you are prioritizing focus. You just stop answering every email the moment it arrives. These are invisible adjustments. No one sees you make them. They see the outcome, which is that you deliver better work with less visible effort. Files come from employees who worked long hours and employees who worked shorter hours with better results. The difference is rarely about hours. It is about how the hours are used. The person who works late into the evening is often catching up on tasks they let slide during the day. The person who leaves at 5 has finished their work because they have guarded their focus and spent it where it counts. Hiring managers do not reward hours, they reward output. These moves do not require permission. You do not need to ask your manager if you can block time on your calendar or delay a response to an email. You just do it quietly until it becomes your pattern. Those invisible adjustments in how you manage time and energy create a compounding productivity gap between you and the person who has not learned to protect their focus. In the first week, the gap is small. You finish 1 extra task because you block 2 uninterrupted hours. The person working reactively finishes fewer tasks but works the same number of hours. Over a month, that gap widens. You complete projects ahead of schedule. They are still catching up. Over a year, the gap becomes visible in performance reviews. Your output is higher. Your quality is more consistent. And critically, you are less visibly stressed. That combination, higher output with less apparent effort, signals competence. It suggests you have capacity for more responsibility. The person working longer hours with lower output signals the opposite. They look maxed out, even if they are working harder. The visible result is that they cannot keep up. Managers notice that pattern, and it shapes what opportunities get offered. The person who has learned to guard their focus gets the stretch assignment. The person who has not gets told to focus on their current workload first. That divergence, repeated over years, is the difference between a career that stalls and one that advances. And it starts with the simple, invisible decision to protect 2 hours on a Tuesday morning and spend them on work that matters. You help someone move a file cabinet on a Thursday afternoon. You do not make a performance of it. You just see they are struggling and you have 10 minutes. 3 months later, that person remembers. Not because the favor was large, because it was offered without conditions. Repeated helpfulness builds a reputation faster than grand favors. The employee who makes themselves available for small, unglamorous tasks without announcing it earns a different kind of credibility than the one who volunteers for the high-visibility project and then disappears. The small gestures accumulate. Someone needs a second set of eyes on a draft. Someone needs coverage for a meeting they cannot attend. Someone needs a question answered quickly so they can meet a deadline. The person who helps each time, without keeping score, builds a web of goodwill that lasts. This is not about being available for every request. It is about choosing moments where a small amount of your effort solves a real problem for someone else and doing it in a way that does not demand recognition. The favor that comes with an implied debt attached feels transactional. The favor that is given and then forgotten feels genuine. People remember the difference. Clear communication prevents misunderstandings before they grow. Debriefs after interviews show a candidate said something that sounded vague or contradictory, and the panel spent 15 minutes trying to figure out what they meant. That confusion costs the candidate the role. The person who survives that filter is the one who speaks in specifics. They say what they mean the first time. Workplace alliances rest on the same principle. When you tell a colleague you will send them a document by Tuesday, and you send it Tuesday morning, that clarity builds trust. When you say you are not sure, but you will find out and get back to them, and you do get back to them, the follow-through reinforces the communication. People learn they can take you at your word. Managers build entire teams around employees who communicate clearly. Not the most talented employees, the most reliable ones, because a reliable communicator makes everyone else's job easier. You do not have to decode their emails. You do not have to ask 3 follow-up questions to understand what they meant. They told you what they would do, when they would do it, and whether they hit the mark. Trust grows through consistent interactions. You answer an email the way you said you would. You show up to a meeting on time. You acknowledge when you made a mistake before someone else has to point it out. You do this once, and it registers. You do this 50 times, and it becomes your reputation. Promotion cases show 2 candidates with similar performance records. One has built relationships across the organization. The other has kept their head down and worked alone. The first candidate has colleagues who speak up for them in the decision meeting. The second candidate has no one. The relationships do not come from grand networking events. They come from small, repeated interactions where the first candidate has been helpful, clear, and consistent. This is not about being liked. It is about being trusted. People do not need to enjoy your company to trust that you will do what you said you would do. They need evidence, and the evidence comes from the accumulation of moments where you proved it. A missed deadline explained honestly. A favor returned without being asked. A question answered clearly the first time. A commitment kept even when keeping it was inconvenient. The alliances that last are the ones built on clarity, consistency, and small acts of helpfulness that do not demand a return. Those are the alliances that survive a restructure, a manager change, or a budget cut because they are not based on convenience. They are based on trust that was earned one interaction at a time. That web of small, trust-based alliances creates career resilience that operates independently of any single manager or team. When your career depends on one relationship, a reorganization can erase years of progress. When your career rests on a network of people who trust you across multiple teams and functions, a reorganization just rearranges the map. Your alliances persist because they are not tied to org chart proximity. They are tied to the repeated experience of working with you and finding that you do what you say. Those alliances become referral channels. When a role opens on another team, your name comes up because someone you helped 6 months ago is in that conversation. When a project needs someone reliable, you get the call because 3 people on that team have worked with you before and know you will deliver. That network effect compounds over time. Each person you help becomes a node. Each node connects to other nodes. And at some point, you have enough distributed trust across the organization that your career stops depending on any single point of failure. You become the person who gets opportunities before they are posted because someone in the conversation knows you and vouches for you. That is not networking in the transactional sense. That is the result of years of small, helpful, reliable interactions that built a reputation solid enough to carry your name into rooms where you are not present. You sit in a meeting, someone makes a suggestion. 3 people immediately speak over each other to say why it will not work. You stay quiet, you watch who speaks, who does not, and what happens to the idea by the end of the hour. That silence is worth more than most of the words in the room. Awareness of unspoken rules protects against missteps that end careers before anyone tells you what you did wrong. Every workplace has rules that are never written down. Who gets copied on which emails? Whose opinion carries weight in certain decisions? Which topics are safe to raise in a group meeting and which should be addressed privately? The employee who learns these rules by observation moves through the organization without friction. A candidate interviews well, gets hired, and then 6 months later, they are on a performance improvement plan. Not because their work is poor, because they have violated an unspoken norm. They escalate a problem to senior leadership without telling their direct manager first. They criticize a decision in a meeting in front of people who are not part of the discussion. None of these missteps appear in the employee handbook, but all of them carry consequences. The people who survive learn to watch first and act second. Listening more than speaking yields clearer understanding of what is actually happening around you. In meetings where tensions run high, the employees who advance are rarely the loudest voices. They are the ones who ask a clarifying question, then let others fill the silence. They absorb information while everyone else is performing. By the end of the meeting, they understand the real issue, which is often not the issue being debated out loud. Debrief sessions after interviews show the panel discussing a candidate who talked too much. They answered every question with a paragraph when a sentence would have done the job. They filled every pause with more words. The panel's assessment is not that the candidate lacks knowledge. It is that they lack judgment. Judgment shows up in knowing when to speak and when to let silence do the work. Choosing battles carefully preserves long-term career capital because every fight you take costs you something, even if you win. Employees spend political capital on issues that do not matter. They argue with a manager over a budget line that will be forgotten in 2 months. They take a public stand on a process change that affects no one's actual work. Each time, they lose a little credibility, not because they are wrong, because they are spending their influence on things that will not be remembered a year later. The employees who build long careers know which issues are worth the cost and which are not. They do not fight every policy they disagree with. They save their objections for the moments when the outcome will shape their work or their team's ability to deliver. When they do speak up, people listen because they have not used up their credibility on smaller skirmishes. Office politics is not about manipulation. It is about understanding that resources are finite, including the patience and goodwill of the people you work with. Every time you push back, you spend a little of that goodwill. Every time you stay quiet when you could have made a point, you conserve it. The person who spends freely wakes up one day and realizes no one is listening anymore. The person who spends carefully finds that when they do speak, the room pays attention. Performance files show an employee who was technically right about an issue, but politically wrong in how they handled it. They copied senior leadership on an email criticizing their manager's decision. They raised a concern in a public meeting that should have been addressed privately. The technical correctness did not save them. The political misstep defined how they were seen from that point forward. The wisdom in navigating office politics quietly is knowing that most battles are not worth fighting, and the ones that are worth fighting require timing, allies, and a clear understanding of what you will gain and what it will cost. You do not walk into a meeting and challenge a senior leader's decision in front of their peers unless you are prepared to leave the organization. You do not take a stand on a process change unless you have already built enough credibility that people will consider your objection instead of dismissing it. These calculations happen silently. No one announces them. But the employees who make them well move through their careers with fewer scars and more opportunities. They are selective about conflict. They engage with politics in ways that preserve their ability to keep engaging. They listen more than they speak. They choose their battles carefully. And they understand that awareness of the unspoken rules is what keeps them from stepping into a trap they did not know was there. Employees with less skill and more political awareness outlast employees with more skill and no awareness at all. The difference is not talent, it is understanding that the workplace is a system with visible rules and invisible ones, and the invisible ones often matter more. That capacity to read and navigate unspoken rules creates a durable advantage that persists across organizational changes. The rules themselves shift when leadership changes or when the company restructures. But the skill of identifying which rules matter and adapting to them without friction, that skill transfers. The employee who has learned to observe before acting, to listen more than they speak, to spend political capital only on issues that matter, can apply that same framework in any organization. They walk into a new team and spend the first few weeks watching. They notice who defers to whom. They notice which topics create tension and which topics generate alignment. They notice who gets interrupted and who does not. And they use those observations to calibrate how they show up. That calibration is not about changing who they are. It is about understanding the local rules well enough to avoid unnecessary friction. Over time, that skill becomes one of the most valuable assets they carry because it allows them to build credibility faster in any new environment. They do not waste time stepping on landmines that more politically aware employees see and avoid. They do not burn goodwill on fights that do not matter. They move through new organizations with less resistance because they have practiced the skill of reading a room and adjusting accordingly. And that skill compounds over a career because each new organization they join gives them more pattern data to work with. The employee who has navigated 3 different organizational cultures successfully has a richer playbook than the one who has only ever worked in one place. They have seen more variations. They have practiced adapting more times. And that practice makes them more resilient, more promotable, and more likely to succeed no matter where their career takes them. You look back over 20 years and realize the moments that mattered were not the ones you thought would matter at the time. The promotion did not come because you gave the best presentation at the quarterly review. It came because you had answered emails clearly for 3 years and people knew they could rely on you. The opportunity did not appear because you networked at the right conference. It appeared because you had helped a colleague finish a project when no one was looking, and they remembered when a position opened on their team. These small moves do not announce themselves. They do not get celebrated, but they add up. A savings account built 3 to 6 months of expenses, one paycheck at a time, gives you the stability to wait for the right role instead of taking the first one out of desperation. A habit of clear communication builds trust that carries your name into rooms where decisions are made. A reputation for following through turns you into the person managers think of first when they need someone who can deliver without drama. None of this happens quickly. All of it compounds. The candidates who move forward are not always the most talented. They are the ones who have made steady, smart moves that shape how decision makers see them. The resume with no errors, the follow-up email sent the next morning, the interview answer that takes ownership instead of blame. Those quiet actions carry more weight than the loudest pitch or the boldest claim because they show consistency. And consistency is what hiring managers trust when they have to choose between 2 people with similar skills. This is the mechanism. Small behaviors, repeated until they become patterns. Patterns that build trust. Trust that creates opportunities. Opportunities that compound over years into the kind of career stability most people want, but few understand how to build. Start with the move that costs you the least and builds the most. If you do not have an emergency fund, set up an automatic transfer from your paycheck to a savings account, targeting 3 to 6 months of expenses. If you have not protected your time, block an hour on your calendar tomorrow morning and treat it like a meeting you cannot miss. If you have not built workplace alliances, help one person this week with something small and do not mention it again. Pick one move, make it a habit. Then add the next one. The career you want is not built in a single decision. It is built in the decisions you make every week for years. Decisions so small that no one notices them except you.